The parsha this week is Parshat VaYishlach, and it covers a period of time of Jacob, Yaakov, our father, returning back to the land of Israel from after 20 years of exile of Golos. The title of this class is To Vanquish a Dragon, and I wanted to give a quick introduction by saying the concept of vanquishing a dragon itself comes from fairy tales, from Beowulf, the idea that some heroic fellow draws his sword and puts an end to the world's problems. And that's a concept which, when I played football was also stressed when coaches used to tell us that winning is not the most important thing. Winning is the only thing. And that's what they used to say to motivate us to put out extra hard in the course of a game and to stay focused and to not let our guard down. When we look at this week's Torah reading, the reason that these ideas are relevant is because this is a parsha of confrontation, and it's always been known that way. I was very enthralled when in 1978, when Prime Minister Menachem Begin landed in the United States to negotiate a treaty with Egypt, with Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt at the time. He first stopped in at the homes of Rabbi Soloveitchik, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, seeking their advice. And the classical thing was, this is the Torah portion that you should consult with. This portion of Jacob confronting Eisav is the Torah portion that when you're negotiating on behalf of the Jewish people, when you're facing what had been until then a sworn enemy of the Jewish people, and you're trying to find a way forward, this is the portion of the Torah to read. So if you look at it in that light, one irony confronts us right away. The Torah portion does begin with Jacob sending out messengers to let Eisav, his twin brother, archenemy, who 20 years before, actually 34 years before, when he left his parents' home, swore to kill him once his father had passed away, to let him know he's on his way back, offering, in a sense, a way of reconnecting with his brother, which is surprising in itself. So if you think about this as a parsha of confrontation between good and evil, between Jacob and Eisav, his sworn enemy, the Jewish people, and the world that we know by tradition has always been seen as antagonistic, the allegory given in the prophets is a group of wolves surrounding a lamb. If that's the case, isn't it ironic that the final chapter of this week's Torah reading, chapter 36, lists all the descendants of Eisav, the kings that come from him, how he inherited Mount Seir, and how his people flourished. And that pattern we find even when we look at the Pesach Haggadah. Because if you remember in the Pesach Haggadah itself, when it records the fact that Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt, it quotes a sentence from Joshua, and the sentence reads, "Vayitain le'Eisav es har seir la'reshet." God gave Eisav, the archenemy of the Jewish people, the Mount of Seir, his eternal portion in the world. Yaakov avonav yardu Mitzrayim, and Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt to become enslaved, to suffer, to eventually emerge with the Exodus. But it's a stark contrast in terms of what we think of as a victory. So why does the Torah seem to set the stage this way? That's what we're going to try to look at today. Now, oftentimes when this parsha is taught, and it starts off with the idea that Yaakov sent messengers, perhaps they were angels themselves, to go out and to tell Eisav that he's returning to the land. This is what you should tell them, that your servant Jacob has been living with Lavan, and that he has much wealth, and he has many possessions, and he's returning back home to the land of Canaan. The typical understanding is that Eisav was waiting anxiously to attack Jacob, perhaps all those years, all 34, 35 years, however long it's been. But we see from the Zohar in a comment that no, it was Jacob who stirred the pot. He could easily have returned back to the land of Canaan with his family, with his cattle. Eventually, Certainly his brother Eisav would have heard that he was back in the land. Perhaps he would have sought him out, perhaps he wouldn't have. And what the Zohar says is that this was initiated by Jacob, and it criticizes Jacob by making a comment: who goes to a sleeping dog and grabs the dog by the ears, therefore riling the dog up so that it would attack them or bite them? So we have to understand, if that's the setting that the Zohar has, then we need to think, what was Jacob's motivation, our forefather Yaakov? He lived a perilous 20 years in the house of Lavan, where he describes at the end he was cheated. He was first cheated in terms of marrying Leah first, then subsequently marrying his choice Rachel, spending 14 years working on behalf of the two wives. Then he spent another 6 years trying to amass his wages, his fair wages for having served Lavan for all those years. And then he escapes literally in the middle of the night, tracked down by Lavan. That's all last week's Torah reading. So at this moment, what is Jacob thinking? What is he looking for when he comes back into the land and he dispatches emissaries to give Eisav a message? And another question you'd ask, what kind of message is he giving him? If Eisav is angry that Jacob took his blessings, why would he possibly say, I've acquired oxen and donkeys, flocks, servants, and maidservants, and I'm sending to tell my Lord to find favor in your eyes? I can imagine that nothing would be less favor finding in the eyes of Eisav than hearing about all of Jacob's successes and how he's returning back to the land with really the antecedents of the Jewish people, with 11 children, 11 sons being born and a daughter, with flocks, an entire household, an impressive camp that he's returning back to the land of Israel with. What is Yaakov's motivation? What is his goal? So one possibility a person might put forward is, well, he was hoping to reconcile with him and make peace with him. Now, if that was his goal, that's refuted by the fact that after they do meet, and after in the end, in chapter 33, sentences 10 through 16, on page 178, Eisav, in fact, offers his brother, and he says, let's join together. Let's travel as one. And Jacob begs off from that. Jacob says, we have to go at our own pace. Please accept my gift, which was sent to you. Inasmuch as God has been gracious to me, and inasmuch as I have everything, Jacob says, he urged Eisav to accept the gift. And then he said, let's go. I'll proceed alongside of you, Eisav offers. And Jacob responds, I have children. We have to go at our own pace. I can't move as quickly as you. You have a different pace of life. You have a different standard of living. You have a different mission in life, which is all implied here. Let me go at my slow pace, according to the gait of the drove before me, including the children, until eventually we could meet each other at Seir. And here he's alluding really to the fact that any possible reconciliation could only happen at the end of days, which is a theme throughout the Torah, where it talks about the prophetic possibility that eventually at the end of days, the Jewish people will climb Mount Seir, and the Jewish people will in fact confront Eisav at that point and vanquish him, but not until that time. A little bit of echoes of last week's class in terms of the understanding that Rachel had about the destiny of the Jewish people. So I think what's inescapable here is that we get the idea that Jacob did not have in mind a lovey-dovey reunion with his twin brother. He did not have in mind that all the enmity and the difference between these two brothers, one who devoted himself to living in tents and studying Torah and teaching his children to carry forward the life of Abraham and Isaac, in comparison to Eisav, who was a hunter, who was a conqueror, who was a feared, powerful individual in the world. It's clear that that wasn't the idea. Yet what had the idea happened to be? So we find something amazing when we look at these sentences on page 178, 179, chapter 33. And for this explanation, you have to go with some ideas expressed by the Sfas Emes. where Jacob prevails on his brother, take the wealth that I sent you. It's yours. I renounce everything. And in a certain sense, according to the Sfas Emes, he's even renouncing the blessings that were taken, the blessings from his father. Now, not the spiritual blessings to make him the heir who would inherit the land of Canaan, not those blessings that were meant to carry on the spiritual legacy of Abraham and Yitzchak. Those blessings were not given up because Jacob understood that they would go no place in the hands of an Eisav, but rather those earthly blessings, to whatever extent Eisav, who had already been blessed in this way, who already was a powerful person, to whatever extent he would harbor any sense of competition with Jacob, any sense that let's run together, let's compete with one another, let's prevail over the world together. What's being very clearly articulated here by Jacob is, I have a different mission statement. I gave you wealth aplenty as a gift, and I'm renouncing those earthly blessings. They are yours to keep. But what I'm going to maintain is my focus on my children, on my family, on building the future of the Jewish people, on ensuring the legacy of Abraham and Yitzchak, my grandfather and father, just in a certain sense reenacting the original purchase of the birthright that took place 2 parshas ago. What Jacob is seeking to make clear, and the reason, according to the Zohar, that he messes with sleeping dogs and he stirs the pot, is because Jacob here, in this confrontation with Eisav, is rather seeking to clarify forever the distinction between the purpose of the Jewish people and the power-seeking, dominant-seeking future, which Eisav, in fact, fulfills, as the Torah says at the end. Generations came from him, kings come from him. He has a secure physical place in the world, a Har Seir. He's in a powerful mountain that's easy to defend. We, the Jewish people, are in a vulnerable land throughout history, dependent on rain. Even the temple itself is placed on a mountain surrounded by higher mountains, in order for us to always understand the vulnerability of the Jewish people. When you approach the Temple Mount from the north, as all the enemies who destroyed the temple did, you're overlooking the mount. It's called Har Tzofim, Mount Scopus. What does Mount Scopus mean? It has an oversight over the whole Jerusalem. It's the perfect place to launch an attack and to vanquish whoever is there. And that's specifically the nature, the place that Jacob understands at this point, that God has placed us, the Jewish people, in the world. So therefore, what does it mean to vanquish the dragon? Well, the arch example of that is the struggle that takes place between Jacob and the angel all night long. Right before he confronts the physical Eisav, Yaakov confronts the angel of Eisav, who he struggles with throughout the entire night in chapter 32. And that angel can't prevail over Jacob. And the sun is rising, and it's time for that angel to depart. Jacob asks very oddly, bless me. Why would anybody want a blessing from their enemy? If you struggle against someone, if someone was mortally trying to wound you, kill you, eliminate you from the world scene, why do you seek their blessing? So what Yaakov was seeking, in fact, was an acknowledgement from the part of the enemy that we are here to stay. Kisarisa im Elokim v'odam v'tuchal. That with God's help, the Jewish people have a place in the world that will always be. I mean, it's giving this class tonight after more than a year of giving classes in the face of such terrible news. And not that the news is good, and not that we have anything specific to celebrate, but just the seeing how the arch enemies of the Jewish people, who a year ago on October 7th had us surrounded. They had Houthis, they had Hamas, they had Hezbollah, they had Syrian border. It was an axis of evil, literally surrounding the Jewish people, showing us to be totally vulnerable. There were predictions early on that whatever war would take place in the north would cost Israel something in the range of 500 lives a day. That's what they were preparing for after October 7th, when they understood that Hezbollah, if they didn't enter the war immediately, were going to find a way to enter the war. What we're beginning to see here is the sunrise. It's not rising on utopia. It's not rising where all the enemies of the Jewish people are eliminated from history, never to be heard from again. That's not what's taking place. But in the standard pattern of Jewish living for the past 3,300 years, what's happening is the sun is rising and it's light outside and our enemies are scurrying away. And we're looking for them to acknowledge once and for all, and even if it's not once and for all, at least for this moment, to acknowledge the fact that we are here, that we can prevail, not vanquish, but we can prevail in the face of any force on earth that could possibly be arrayed against us. And what do we see from this? If you look at chapter 33, sentence 18, and that's on page 180, 181 in the Stone Chumash. Jacob arrives intact to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, upon his arriving from Padan Aram, and he encamps before the city. He bought the parcel of land upon which he pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kesitas. He set up an altar there and he proclaimed, God, the God of Israel. Now, the term Israel has just been introduced to the Torah by the enemy of Israel, telling Yaakov from now on his name will be Yisrael. The fact is, his name is not only Yisrael from now on, unlike Avraham, whose name was changed from Avram to Avraham, and unlike Sarai, whose name was changed to Sarah. Sometimes Yaakov is still called Yaakov, Jacob, clinging to the heel of his enemy. And sometimes he's called Yisroel as being the one who can stand and prevail and hold his own. And that name is going to become interchangeable, even though a few sentences from now, God, in fact, names him Yisroel. But as we see through the text for the rest of the book, this name comes and goes based on, I wouldn't say circumstances, but rather based on the standing of Yaakov in terms of his ability to represent his mission in the world, which again is not to vanquish the dragon, but rather to assert a spiritual view of the world and to live accordingly. Hence, he's got to give away wealth. Hence, he has to renounce certain parts of the blessings that are this worldly. And ultimately, in this parsha, again, God appears to Jacob and reasserts the idea that the land is yours. Your children are going to flourish. This is going to be their inheritance forever. All of the eternal parts, all of the spiritual parts of that blessing that they've seemingly been arguing over now become clear. Does that mean we're renouncing riches and wealth? No, Jacob remains a wealthy person. But let's look at the text again. Vayovei Yaakov Shalem. Jacob arrives intact. But the word Shalem doesn't just mean intact. Shalem means complete. And what does Rashi say here? Rashi says, Shalem begufo. He healed from his physical wounds. Shalem b'mamono. His wealth was intact, even though he had given away huge portions of his wealth and flocks to his brother, to Eisav. He still had enough to fulfill his mission in life. Shalem b'toroso. His spiritual orientation and focus was also intact and was undisturbed. He wasn't swayed from the mission of the Jewish people by looking at the trappings of success and power and might that Eisav fully displayed to him, but rather he remained shalem, complete, whole, wholesome. We use the word shlemut to describe a person who's united and clinging to Hashem, full with Hashem. That's what the Torah is saying here. Look at the application in Pirkei Avot, chapter 4, Mishnah 1. Ezehu chacham, who is wise? Not someone who wins the Nobel Prize or who can outsmart all others, but rather a person who's open to learning from others. And learning from others means coming to understand your own shortcomings and coming to adopt from other people their strengths and apply them to yourselves. Ezehu Oshir, who's wealthy, Hasomeach Bechelko, not the person who has the most in quantity, but the person who has enough, and enough not only to take care of himself and his family, but enough to do kindness to others. Ezehu Gibor, who's powerful, who's strong. Eisav certainly in the eyes of the world was a Gibor in every sense of the word, but Hakovesh at Yitzro, someone who can manage their own nature, who can seek out an ever deepened relationship with Hashem, who can improve themselves, who can struggle. That's a big idea here. And hence what the Torah says, if we go back to that sentence 18 in chapter 33, Vayavo Yaakov Sholem Ir Shechem, Vayichan es Pnei Ha'ir, which means he camped against the city. And what the Medrash says, Vayichan, he offered chen. He offered an opportunity to build the society around him, to improve things for those people from whom he had just bought a parcel of land, to make life better even for his neighbors, so that they could ultimately come to tune in to the values of the Jewish people and to benefit from them. And hence, we present the world with a sense of altruism and kindness and concern. The Jewish people have always been known with that. There's an article just the other day about how Jewish organizations are beginning to send aid back into Syria to help those people suffering from the war there, even while so much is uncertain. And it said from 2013 until 2018, in the midst of all the terrible civil war going on there, these Jewish agencies, private and some under the supervision of the government, were healing people, bringing people to hospitals, offering services to people there, always reaching out in a sense to say, understand our values, understand what goodness is all about. And hence what the Midrash says is Vayichan here doesn't just mean he camped, but it means he sought to find chen, motzah chen, to seek not the approval, to seek the affection of the people around him. That's not because he had so much money that he didn't know what to do with it, but it was rather because of the attitude of wanting to help the world become a better place, but not become absorbed with the world around him, not decide to run alongside of Eisav, and even to differentiate oneself and say, okay, you pursue your might and your authority and your conquest. I'll run alongside of you and I'll offer kindness and help people. Even that, not a differentiation enough. Why? Because under such circumstances, the Jewish people can't possibly remain sholem begufo, sholem b'mamono, sholem b'toroso. They couldn't preserve their physical being. They can't preserve their material being, and they certainly can't preserve their spiritual beings if they seek to do that. There has to be a differentiation. And hence, this brings us to an idea that is so applicable to Hanukkah. We're in the month of Kislev. Tonight is the 10th of Kislev. On the date, the 10th of Kislev, 103 years ago, my father was born in the Bronx, so I want to dedicate this class to his memory and to all the tremendous effort and resources he devoted to giving each of his children an opportunity to study Torah, to learn Torah, and to grow to be proud Jewish people. The battle between Yaakov and the angel took place in the dark of night. The dark of night is always associated with the Greeks. Several places. Rashi, at the beginning of the Torah, it says, that the land was choshech al pnei ta'om, that the world was covered with darkness. Says that's a reference to Yavon, to the Greeks, because the Greeks darken the eyes of the wise. How do they do that? We believe the Greeks are the masters of beauty, and indeed they are descendants of Yefes, the one who appreciated art and beauty. But in doing so, the Greeks end up denying anything else on a spiritual level beyond what you can see, what you can touch, and what you can feel. That became their definition of reality. And Hanukkah was the moment in time when the Greeks forbade the Jewish people from keeping Shabbos. How do you differentiate one day from the other six? There's no reality to that differentiation. The sun rises and the sun sets just the same on Friday night and Saturday night as it does the rest of the nights of the week. They forbade bris milah, because why are you attacking the integrity of our physical form when we, the Greeks, idealize the physical form and we compete without clothing on so that our athletes can show everyone how physically perfect they are? And Brit Milah is the opposite of that, where we're out to complete ourselves, even on a physical level, through devotion to Hashem and through limitation, through accepting limitations, which are purely spiritually based and not physically based. So it brings us to Hanukkah. Hanukkah was a remarkable time because the challenge to the Jewish people was not like it was on Purim, where Haman said he was going to annihilate the Jewish people, but rather it was purely on the basis of Mahaviram michukei Torasecha. The Greeks' only goal was to separate us from the Torah, or to make us assimilate into all the other peoples of the world so that we would just be good Greeks. And hence our Torah was translated into Greek, and any distinction of the Jewish people was meant to be dissolved into the melting pot of mankind. And many Jews agreed, and many Jews gave up on the mission of Jacob. Many Jews, if you use the analogy of fighting the angel all night long, many Jews felt that it's already 2:00 in the morning and it's still dark, and I'm not vanquishing this dragon, and it's still opposing me, and it's still challenging me. How much longer can I hold on? Let's cut a deal. Let's figure out a way that we can make our compromises and we can subvert the primacy of our spiritual legacy to the physical dominance and beauty and culture of the Greek people. That's what Hanukkah is all about. And hence you can see how this portion of the Torah is always read at this time of the year. And I want to add just one additional thought and then draw some conclusions. Interestingly, the Talmud says that the greater a person is, the greater is their Yetzer Hara. It's a statement in the Talmud in Sukkah 52a. Koha Gadol Mechavero, Yitzro Gadol Himenu. What does this mean? It means that as we strive to be better people, and as we seek out to grow in our shleimut, in our spiritual completion, throughout our lives, at all ages of life, the challenges are not going to disappear. We're not going to vanquish our Yetzer Hara. It's never going to reach a point where it says, "Woo, you've accomplished so much. You're such a great spiritual person. You've studied so much Torah. You've done so much kindness. I'll back off. I'll give you your due." That's not the nature of the challenge. Why? Because at such a moment, growth would cease to happen. Hence, you have another statement in the Talmud. Al tamin bi'atzmecha ad yamosla. We don't rest on our laurels. We're not permitted at any point in our lives to say, "I've done it all. Now it's clear sailing. Now I can just, all the risks and challenges have been defeated, and now I can just sail through the rest of my life." Such an attitude is antithetical to Judaism. And it's part and parcel of the whole theme of this parsha. So to go back to our original question, how can we have a Torah portion which is known forever as the paradigm of confronting evil and antagonism in the world that concludes with an entire chapter laying out the success and the development of our enemies, and how there's this generation and that generations, and this son had this son, and this king had this king, and this person dominated here. And if you look at the article of Chumash on page 197, there's a whole chart of the genealogical family of Eisav spreading out in all directions. And we know that this galut, this exile that we're in today, it remains under the thumb, under the rulership of Rome, who is the descendant of Eisav by Jewish tradition. That yet is the case. So the Torah is telling us something very significant. Yes, this is the Torah portion of confrontation. Don't expect to stand up for all that is right and good and leave the field vanquished under your feet and then rest on your laurels and be the hero for the rest of the time. The Torah is insisting on us that we have a new definition of heroism, and it revolves around persistence. It revolves around trust in God that we can prevail. Certainly, Jacob, in the midst of that dark night, must have thought over and over and over again, I'm struggling with a force that's far greater than me. And the rabbis tell us that our Yetzer Hara, the spiritual challenges, are greater than us. And if not for God assisting us, we wouldn't prevail. So Jacob learned firsthand that it's a question of putting in the effort, ultimately relying on God's assistance, and never giving up, never being subject to the idea that I've done my part and it's just not fair. And if I still have opposition, if I'm still not a complete person in every sense of the word, and I still feel moral challenge, then that tells me that I've lost. The opposite is the case. It tells you that you're on the right track. It tells you that you're living the most fulfilled, robust life possible. It's telling you that you are achieving the status of a chacham, a wise person. It tells you you're achieving the status of an oshir, a person who really has everything because they enjoy and benefit and use properly everything they have. And it tells you that you're a gibor because you're mastering the best you can the nature within you, and you're subduing it for the purpose of serving Hashem and becoming an ish shalem, becoming a complete person. That's what confrontation is all about. When Menachem Begin came in and he went to these rabbis before negotiating the future of the land of Israel with the Egyptian government, he understood nobody's going to disappear. It's not as though people are going to say, oh, in 1978, Menachem Begin arrived in Washington, D.C. He went to Camp David, and he secured forever the future of Israel and the future of the Jewish people. We know profoundly after this year that that's not the case. And yet that makes his effort and the success that he had much more precious, much more heroic to us, and something we're always indebted to, just as we are to each of the generations before us who have managed to preserve and protect the legacy of the Jewish people. And those blessings, quote unquote, that aren't really suited for us, we have to learn to discard them because they're only going to knock us off the right path. They're only going to make us less wise and less strong and less wealthy. That's the reality of life. That's what it means to be able to successfully confront the world. That's what it means to live a fulfilling life and to emerge as Yisroel, to emerge as the eternal Jewish people who are unmovable in terms of the direction of bringing the world to a fulfilled place. Yes, we will conquer Har Seir at some point in the future. That's not what we're doing right now. We're rather edging our way toward an ever more perfect, ever more strong, ever more wise Jewish future. And please God, we'll do so together. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.